disappointing that we've got this extra burden, particularly given that the actual funding was pretty much flat for, with the exception of extraordinary items. Was only got 500 quid more, didn't we? This coming year, so 152,000 is a good chunk. So, but it's the best estimate. That's all I can say, really. And we have to assume that will be the same going forward. But again, that's still something we don't know.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the borrowing line, and point 35 does say, as usable capital receipts are used up. So I'm guessing that at the moment the borrowing is against our current capital receipts, so it's not external borrowing.
It's internal borrowing.
Internal borrowing.
Yeah.
But secondary on that, as you go through the forward spending, does that, it does drop down a lot. Was that all predicted to be contained within internal borrowing and not have to go externally, or is that dependent upon us being able to keep our reprofile capital?
It's assuming that the capital programme performs as predicted. So we don't expect to actually have to go to the market to physically borrow any cash for the whole of the 5 years. So it will all be internal borrowing if those predictions are correct. And obviously there will be potentially capital receipts that might be received in the meantime that we don't know about and can't budget for, which might not even be our capital receipt. It might be Section 106 monies that we hold and are due to the county council, or still money that is due to the health sector, for example, which we sit on as part of our cash reserve, which we can effectively borrow on an interim basis.
I wanted to ask about borrowing as well, actually, so I can follow that one up. Obviously, we've been talking about possible capital projects that are going to have to be cut. We seem to have a policy of not externally borrowing, whereas lots of other councils have a policy of borrowing externally. So just for example, West Berkshire has borrowing levels, these were in the public domain, had borrowing levels in last year of 186 million and an authorised borrowing limit of 383 million. So I was just wondering, what is the reason why we and other councils say we have a policy of not borrowing externally? So I wonder what kind of political decisions are being made about borrowing versus not borrowing, and do we have an authorised borrowing limit that has been calculated, and what is that, and why are we not doing it to, for example, meet some of the goals in our corporate plan related to climate and environment? So.
There's lots of questions about that thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Obviously, West Berkshire is a unitary, so it's quite a different beast, to be honest. And when you do borrow, there's still a revenue implication. So had we been physically borrowing the market today or this coming year, then that would have a negative impact on our revenue budget. To answer your question politically, I suppose, is that if a project comes forward, which is deemed to be acceptable as far as meeting the various criteria, for whatever, and maybe in the back of your mind we're talking about solar farms, perhaps, or as an example, if it's something that is deemed to be something that is revenue generating and feasible, I would have no political reasons not to push for borrowing. So it's not a position that I would think that the cabinet or the administration would refuse to borrow per se. There might well be examples where it's good to, subject to advice from officers, obviously.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Thank you.
Can I make a couple of more technical points? I suppose. First of all, I just quickly did a quick calculation on what West Berkshire's borrowing cost would be that it would manifest off the numbers you've quoted, and it would be in excess of £10 million will be their borrowing cost in the revenue budget. Now, as we've seen earlier on, our revenue budget is 20 million. So, but again, because it's a unitary, borrowing costs need to be assessed as whether they're proportionate to the council's overall sort of budgetary position and resources. Now, in reality, that level of borrowing cost will probably almost certainly be proportionate to West Berkshire's revenue budget because it's got all their services in. A more proportionate figure for VOWH is more likely to be in the order of 2 to 3 million, but that would be that's well over 10% of the net revenue budget. The other point I'd make is, I'm trying not to sound like a local government accountant here, but effectively, we are showing a borrowing line in here, but we won't, as Andy's alluded to, we won't actually ring anybody up to borrow because we have cash balances.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a distinction between having a borrowing need, so that our accounts and this budget show us having a need to borrow because we don't, but that is defined as, do you have enough capital receipts to fund your capital expenditure? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
So we have a borrowing need. Whether you need to borrow, though, is actually more of a head of finance type cash flow decision about whether actually you are better off running down your cash balances rather than actually borrowing from the market. So I just thought it'd be useful to make that distinction.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Thank you. The back of that, can I just ask, if you're effectively losing some of your cash receipts, does that mean you're losing some interest, some possible interest that you could have?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So you are,
But
it's not
if
free.
you're investing at 4% and you're having to borrow at 7%, it's quite an
It's
easy
under
decision
control
financially, isn't
rather
it?
than
Yeah.
that market.
And the medium-term financial plan, which is Appendix F to the papers, if you look at the interest income line, that line reflects the reduction of balances. It reflects two things. It's going down because the balance is going down and interest rates forecast to go down, but the reduction in balances, because we're going to use our balances to fund capital, is reflected in that number.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to ask about the beacon. On page 16, there are various budget movements, I think, but please don't bother to look at those, Angie, because it's a more general question than that. Which is, there's no line, I think, in the budget which actually says the beacon, which is going to cost that much. But from memory, I think last year it cost, it was a net cost to the council of £400,000. I suppose my question is twofold, really. First of all, looking at the 5-year projection, and I think it's 10 million of over that period, isn't it? Something like that. We are forecasting of losing reserves. That's 2 million, 5 times £400,000. So it seems a disproportionate amount for one particular activity, will have a disproportionate effect on our projections. And secondly, would you agree as well that there's a danger with such a large amount being spent on this particular area, that it will be crowding out other projects at a time when actually cash for other projects is extremely short?
I guess it's true to say that spending on any discretionary service crowds out expenditure elsewhere. That's without a shadow of a doubt. And you could say the same about grounds maintenance, which is technically a discretionary service. We don't have to own council land and necessarily maintain it. So yes, carrying out happens when you choose to have a discretionary service that costs money. I'm pretty sure this committee's getting a report in March which will allow you to see what progress the beacon has made. You are aware there's been various work done on the beacon to try to reduce the deficit, and I'm aware of a number of initiatives that either have taken place or continue to take place. But you're right. If you're offering a service like that, all community centres tend to lose money. And you're right that the beacon is losing that sort of sum, and indeed has lost money pretty much every year for a number of years. Earlier on and in the report, we talk about potentially having to make tough decisions in the future, and no discretionary service can be excluded from those tough decisions if we come to that.
Thank you very much indeed. I suppose underlying it all is a question of proportionality, isn't it, really? I absolutely agree that discretionary services by their very nature cost money, but it's a matter of working out which proportionately is worth spending that sort of level of income on. Sure.
Any other questions?
Councillor Member.
So you mentioned at the start about the medium-term financial plan and how you're quite relaxed about towards the end of it because we expect not to exist in a few years if the government will have its way. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about other kind of effects on the budget, perhaps where it comes to bill or any other kind of ongoing projects that we have, what it will mean for us if we cease to exist in a few years and how it will affect the budget.
If we cease to exist, we won't have a budget, I suppose. It's the obvious answer to that.
But maybe like the SIL projects and stuff like that.
So I don't know. I don't know what the government might say. That the SIL projects that have been identified and monies have been committed will continue to be there until they're not allowed to be there, or until they're drawn down and spent. I don't know what the government might say when D-Day happens. Let's assume we demerge and become a unitary. What the rules will be. I would like to say certainly if I'm around at the time, I will go into that expecting everything that we've committed to do as a council, like SIL projects and like capital projects that haven't yet to be delivered, would be something that we would fight to keep if we're allowed to. In fact, my biggest concern, in fact, probably with LTR isn't so much on the finances, but it's on the tremendous amount of work that officers will have to do through a merger. Any corporate that ends up merging an awful lot of time and effort, and the thought is having to has to be given to the actual mechanics of merger, and that's going to get in the way of delivery of things that we want to do. That's by far my biggest concern, and it'd be a real great shame if particularly the senior officer corps having to spend all their time, understandably so, dealing with merger, and don't frankly have the time to deliver what we want to deliver, those things that are currently in the plan.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've got two technical ones. One is, do we keep the interest gained on the EZ business rates before it's handed over? Or does all the interest get handed over to the?
I'm pretty sure we keep it, but Simon,
Yeah, we effectively act as banker, so we retain all the business rates and the interest earned on them, and we pay over to the county as per their budgetary needs. So effectively, we're paying that they effectively borrowed against those receipts to fill a variety of capital schemes. So we effectively pay them when they incur their borrowing costs. We pay them so that they're reimbursed. The other thing it's also paying for is a proportion of what was the LEP is now in OCC's running costs, and they're obviously paid for on an annual basis.
I'm just wondering about the interest of the money that's held. Is that paid over and they spend, or is it?
No, it's held in the account, but obviously the interest the interest on their balances is ring fenced for them.
So it's not their
Not us,
money.
yeah.
Okay. And the second one is because they're both PINs, government projects. I can't remember if it's PINs or NIPS, but anyway, government projects. Botley West and the Abingdon Reservoir, should they happen, would they attract NDR?
Yes, and we'll also know business rates.
But it's business rates for renewable energy. Yeah.
that's a good point. Actually, it's a good question, Judy, isn't it? My understanding is
I hadn't ever thought of that, and I just wondered.
Simon might not know this answer either, but the local planning authority, when it gives permission for solar farms, gets to keep 100% of the business rates. But that is where it acts as a local planning authority. I'm pretty sure that might well not be the case, where it's a massive piece of infrastructure that is determined by the Secretary of State.
But we would get 20. If I get my maths right, we will get 20%.
Yeah, we still get some of it, but we don't get it all, which we do with solar farms. And interesting, you mentioned at the reservoir. Yes, there would be business rates from the reservoir, but if it is built, it will be built over the site of at least two very large solar farms that already exist, where we're getting 100% of the business rates.
Yeah.
So we'd get 20% rather than 100.
Yeah.
Let's just supplementary on that. do we believe that there is actually is when these solar farms are approved by the Secretary of State or whoever, not by ourselves, do we actually believe that there is already a formula setting out how much money we may or may not receive? The reason I'm asking is if that's potentially likely to happen, I wonder whether we ought to try and get our retaliation in first, if you know what I mean, in terms of putting a case as to why we should get some of that money.
I mean, I think, you know, even when it's a strategically significant piece of infrastructure. So, for example, this, you know, the VOWH got business rates paid by was RWE and Power in the end in respect to Didcot Power Station, for example. It still does, even though it would have had no say in the siting of that, you know, and its building. It's still entitled to its business rates. I think on the solar farms, there's a specific incentive, if you like, to councils to you know, grant permission for solar farms. That incentive being to retain 100% of business rates, but there are very few specific incentives like that. I mean, I think, you know, for all the other major pieces of infrastructure. So I remember sitting next to someone in my position from a authority that are getting a nuclear power station, and he was rubbing his hands thinking about, you know, the extra NNDI he's going to get, that he's going to get from that power station being in his area. In the same way we were tearing our hair out when we lost Didcot Power Station, you know, in terms of our budget. So they are very big numbers, but I think in terms of you know, a particular incentive, the only one I can really think of is the solar farm. Other than that, you're bound by the normal, you know, NNDR rules.
So don't get your hopes up is the message, the message really, isn't it?
No, but to be fair, I mean, the income that we did get from, you know, Didcot Power Station was massive. You know, it was you know, it was a big bill from NNDR, and 20% of the big bills are still a lot of money. So that said, of course, is that you know, if that came along new, we'd get the benefit from it until the business rates are reset, and that's, you know, so then we'd lose it again. So you only get that benefit if the resets become more frequent as the government intends. We'd only get that benefit for 3 years, and we're built into our base anyway. What they give us with one hand.
Thank you, Simon. Please, can I just ask about council tax, because we have a relatively very low council tax compared to other similar councils, and that's due to a long period of decisions that have been made about whether to increase. One option that's theoretically available to us is to raise council tax through a referendum to go above the £5 maximum. And I just wondered what discussions, if any, have been had about whether or not that's sensible or possible or desirable.
It's certainly possible. We could decide to do it. Referenda are very expensive. I think the take was that I'm not sure there's been any successful referendums where a council has proposed to increase council tax beyond the referendum limit, where the electorate say yes please. And therefore it would be a massive risk, I think, to undertake an expensive referendum when you're pretty sure what the results might be. But you're right, we are very much one of the lowest council tax councils in the country, and over and above that, we're also much lower than our peers, who incur similar costs and some of the costs that we experience here in the Vale. And there is another option, which is to ask effectively the government for dispensation, where the referendum rules are relaxed for particular councils that are in financial difficulties. And I think in the briefing, Simon alluded to that, but we're currently not in the financial difficulties, even though were the 5-year medium-term financial plan to materialise as expected, we can see financial difficulties on the horizon. But I don't think at the moment, if we were to go to the government and say, in 3 years' time, we think we've got a problem, can we please raise the referendum limit, that they'll turn around and say yes.
Yeah.
So we're watching it, but I wouldn't discount it. We need to watch this space, but if things deteriorate or we get closer to that position and still think that that's likely to happen, we need to do so quickly enough so that we're not already in a position of financial distress and Simon is a section 114 officer rather than section 151 officer. So it's a balancing act. Hopefully that's answered your.
Thank you very much.
I raised a follow-up. I can say, I think I know the answer because I did ask this as another councillor. If, as the white paper has suggested, we are all going to become unitaries of one form and another, because at that point, the council tax would then be set for the unitary.
Yeah.
And therefore, it would make a difference which unitary authorities because I think it's my understanding that it averages out, that you get the participants in the unitary, they then average out the council tax for the participants in the unitary. So therefore, which unitary you go into, you would then be having a different council tax. Is that
I'm not
correct?
sure of that actually, and I think it's either not that clear or not that case. But Simon, do you want to?
There would be likely to be bespoke rules for every unitary that came into what their referendum limit would be. I remember looking in this a few years ago in a case where two district councils merged. So it wasn't a unitary, it was where two district councils, that were working together merged. And basically the referendum limit was based on the lower of the two council taxes of the councils that merged. And the logic there, if you think about it, is if you set a referendum limit, it's about the increase that the resident pays. So actually, and there's a wide discrepancy between the levels of council tax across Oxfordshire and across into neighbouring authorities. But if the referendum limit is designed to stop the resident getting an excessive increase, it would by definition have to be linked to the lower of the council taxes to start with. That said, there will clearly need to be, as I said, there'll be a bespoke decision taken on each area. But you can just imagine the headlines. If you're in a if it's harmonised at the top, then all the there's a potential for significant backlash from the residents in the cheaper area because they'll have a significant increase in council tax.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait and see what the government announces on that, along with all the other announcements we're waiting for.
Are there any more? Eric, I'll give you the last question.
I just want to clarify something in my head. A leisure contract and a waste contract are two different beasts, are they not?
Absolutely.
The one we're paying them to provision of service, the other one they're paying us because we have the infrastructure they can use to provide a service. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, so one might be revenue generating and one might be revenue negative.
And is there a world where it might flip the other way around, or?
A little bit concerned we might be talking about contracts. So
yeah.
If you want to briefly then at the end go into confidential session, I'll probably find it easier to answer that.
I think my main question is answered.
Nick, so I think Eric's just said his main question was answered in that yes, they're very different beasts.
Yeah.
Potentially. So possibly we don't need to discuss that further. We'll obviously have you talking about those contracts as and when. But Nick.
No, thank you, Chair. You've anticipated what I was going to say. I just realised that we were drifting towards specific contractual discussions, which the members have all realised themselves is something we can't do today. So I appreciate that part of the conversation's closing, and thank members for their remembering the governance rules.
Thank you, Nick. I think on that note, let's move us to our recommendation that we're being asked to do is that we consider the report of the Head of Finance on the revenue budget 25-26 and capital programme 25-26 to 29-30 and make any recommendations to Cabinet that we want to make. So committee, does anybody want to propose any recommendations that we want to make? Or are we happy to note the report and
With the minutes, I think, yes.
I think we're happy to know the report.
Yeah.
It's a very comprehensive report. I think they've got more comprehensive over the years, and it's a good thing.
Okay.
Sorry, should we perhaps just record, sorry, is it being recorded, the request for the budget against action against budget we were talking about earlier?
Earlier on about having an extra column,
Yes,
that will all be part of the minutes.
yes,
Yeah.
okay. And the bail discussion as well, no doubt.
It will all be included, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so can I have a proposer then and a seconder to note down blank?
Those,
Proposed. Second, so proposed, councillor Border, second, councillor Batstone. Thank you ever so much. I think if we get our heads out of the individual lines and the detail, I think it's really clear that we are still in a good position relative to a very, very difficult big picture. So thank you ever so much for all your work and to all the cabinet members who've been involved, and particularly to you, Andy, for all the work. It must be an enormous intellectual exercise every year.
You would have been part of it.
Well,
That part of it, I wasn't.
I suppose
yes.
we also want to thank Mark Coleman, who
Yes.
actually did take some of the weight.
Indeed, yeah. If he's listening, thank you, Mark. They took the pressure off me when I wasn't around.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so yes, we're happy to close that item then and move on. Let's have a 2-minute break just for comfort if anybody wants one, and we will start again at 7:50. That's 3 minutes.
Susie, please could you just pause the stream on this slide? Thank you.
Be sufficient.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. you. Brilliant, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Susie. Welcome back to our VOWH Scrutiny Committee meeting. We are moving on to item 10 of this evening's agenda, which is the new council plan, previously known as the corporate plan. And I'd really like to welcome Councillor Andy Fulsham, our regular guest at Scrutiny, who has his portfolio, and also we have online our officers Tim Arie and Adriana Partridge as well to support on this item. So Councillor Fulsham, please introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to be able to be back with you on this item. Looking back over my notes, I was here in February talking about the early stages of the gestation of what is now the council plan. And it actually enables me to thank you because we're sort of closing the loop now and taking on board a lot of the comments that came up through scrutiny and through early engagement with all members and with officers as part of the plan through the year. And I'm sure you will recognise some of the changes that this committee actually recommended. The fourth key theme of innovative transformation and financial stability enables us to hang a lot more council operations off that key theme. We know is embedded in a lot of the DNA of how we work. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the wider members of the council who attended a very well attended all councillor briefing back in December. And again, we were able to do a lot of work finalising and finessing the council plan through the feedback that we got at that occasion. So thank you. Your comments do make a difference. They help us tremendously. And I'm very pleased that we've now got a stronger and more robust plan as a result. I'm here to talk about any of the changes, any of the differences in the light of local government reorganisation. There will be a number of known unknowns, and indeed probably some unknown unknowns as well, but I will try and answer as much as I can.
Thank you, Councillor Fulsham, and thank you for your nice words about our committee. Would anybody like to start off with any questions or comments? Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a very broad question to ask what you think the biggest change is in light of the local government reorganisation.
Okay, the biggest change that we've seen in the council plan is that we're not presenting at this stage the annual delivery plans because we're waiting. I was checking news and emails as the early part of the meeting was on to see if we'd had anything late in the day from the government. No, we haven't. We don't know exactly what local government reorganisation will bring to us, which actually hampers us bringing forward annual delivery plans. For one thing, it means that if we're going to get on a very fast track reorganisation, and that fast track is actually quite fast, we might choose to do a 2-year delivery plan rather than 2 1-year delivery plans, because to be honest, it'd be so breakneck speed, we may as well plan once and deliver rather than do an annual delivery plan at that point. But if reorganisation is going to take 3 years, we may as well do 3 1-year delivery plans. And if we've got it's going to take 4 years, you'll get the whole shooting match of the full council plan. That's the biggest change. Some of the supporting wording has actually been gone through to make sure we're not talking too much about long-term whatever, because officers and I are very aware that we can't promise to do the stuff if we're no longer in existence. So that's the key wording change. In many ways it hurts because I like to think long-term. I like to make sure that something is sustainable and deliverable. So yeah, but we've got to be careful with our words.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Just on what you said there, and on if we've got 1 year, we'll deliver a 1-year plan, we've got 2 years, etc., etc. if then it is feasible and possible to deliver it on a shorter timescale, could we do that anyway?
I think there's a slight misunderstanding there. The 2-year delivery plan would only be for if we were told would cease to exist after about 2 years. Whereas if we run for 3 or 4 years, we'd have a series of 1-year delivery plans.
Right. Okay.
A lot of the stuff that is going into the delivery plans, the early stages of the overall program that we've started talking about as it evolve, will actually be relevant to any new unitary at any point during merger operations, because it's a lot of stuff about improvements in customer service and automation, items like that. So it's building block stuff. It's the stuff that, and actually one of the first stages is defining that endpoint, the target operating model, and that's where we need to be very certain exactly what we're going to look like at the point of merger or at the end of 4 years as we started it, before we commit to the later stage that would actually shoehorn us into the state that we need to be at the end of the day.
All right. Thank you.
Keith, can I ask you about section 24 directions, which I learned about recently and I'm finding fascinating. So these are when local governments are being reformed, they can't just splash all their money away in anticipation of not existing anymore. But I wonder, does it make a difference if, for example, you have a council plan and an action plan to deliver in the short term? Would it make a difference then, say in 18 months time, if you say, look, hang on, we've had this in our plan for a long time, this is not a new idea that we're going to build a 50-metre swimming pool in Uffington. Does it make a difference if with these kind of things in corporate plans? Nick's on stage. Our head of legal for people watching.
If officers could come up with the legal position, that would be very helpful.
Chair, are you happy for me to come in then at
Please
that point?
Nick. Yes, sorry, please do.
This will be very new to all councillors. So if there was an exam, it would be a question added very late to the exam paper. With section 24 is the mechanism, as you rightly say, Chair, that controls what councils are able to do at the time of their transferring into what are sometimes called shadow authorities, the future unitary that would come into existence. What they do is limit you. They will do what the Secretary of State wants them to do, and we don't know the detail of that. All we can do is look at historic ones that have been employed elsewhere. For example, I spent some time looking at the ones for Bournemouth. What they mostly do is restrict you to your statutory duties. Well, they won't change through the life of the thing, but also matters that you have already contractually become bound to do. Otherwise, you've got very limited spending powers. So if it's a matter where you have entered into contracts with binding terms, then you are likely to be able to carry on with that in one form or another, whether it's as a transfer or novation as they're known, or whether it's you can complete them within the period up until the organisation ceases. But as far as new things or things that were aspirations that you haven't actually established a contractual relationship with, they are very, very likely to not be possible during that transfer time. Chair, that's a bit of a legally answer, but I hope it was straightforward for the public listening at home as well.
Thank you, that's very useful to know.
Thank you. That's very much a more succinctly put version of what I've been led to believe, which is basically the longer you go through the process of being merged, the less powers you get to come up with anything in terms of new projects. Indeed.
Thank you.
Just a little technical thing. It mentions Twitter throughout this report.
Oh, yes.
Indeed, and I would point the members to the recent answer from my colleague Councillor Edwards on the council's now use of other social media channels. Certainly, personally, I'm now boycotting X Twitter. I can't call it X because that means something very different in the line of work that I'm involved in. So I now use other social media channels for all my communications.
But nevertheless, I think that probably
in the
needs to be
report itself,
updated.
It doesn't need to be updated, doesn't it?
The
It's-
wording.
The word.
The wording, it can certainly be tweaked and changed to incorporate mentions to some other social media providers are available. TM.
The social media provider formerly known as. Adriana.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to provide some clarification. The report you're referring to there is simply the engagement report that was written at a point in time in July 2024. It doesn't actually form part of the council plan. It's just a supporting document to show the journey at a point in time in July of how we engaged with members of the public, etc., in terms of forming it. I just wanted to make it clear it's not part of the council plan. It's a separate supporting document.
But it still will be public, won't it? So.
It still would be public, but it was written
Will
at
be
a point in
public,
time in July, but yes.
And it was X at that time.
Yeah, okay, we'll take that on board. I just wanted to cause a distinction. It's not part of the council plan.
Thank you, Adriana. Yes, that's a very important point. Thank you. Other questions on the council plan? Councillor Border.
I suppose it's slightly inevitable that most of the questions should be on the council post-mortem plan rather than the council plan itself as things stand at the moment. But what I just wanted to say was that I did find this actually refreshingly readable and succinct compared with many documents that councils, by their very nature, tend to produce. And I find very, very little that one can find that's objectionable in it, telling you the truth. And maybe there have been omissions, which I haven't spotted. But I thought it was quite a good read. I was particularly pleased about the fourth strategic priority myself as well. And I think that it does very much round out the paper. I'm very conscious of the fact that it's living where we do, which is quite a, a well-off area. And I think, we've been given some more impetus by the Chancellor of the Exchequer today, is talking about Cambridge and the Oxford axis and everything like that and how important it is. But I do see that small market, it's easy to be complacent, I suppose, and it's easy to see that small market towns are under continuing pressure in order to maintain their economic relevance as things stand now. And so I think, this idea of sustainable development, supporting local companies is really important and something we mustn't lose sight of. That wasn't a question.
Thank you. No, but I agree with you, and I think it's really important to thank you, Councillor Fulsham, and everybody else involved in this latest situation, because I think this committee did particularly feel that the financial transparency and the accountability was a really vital element, even though it's a statutory requirement, and we should be doing it anyway. We did think it was really important to publicly state that. So I think, yes, we all appreciate that that's made an appearance in top four.
If I can come back briefly there, I want to thank you both for that. One of my guiding principles in the whole corporate plan and then council plan process was to make it accessible, make it a usable go-to document for all our residents and for all our officer team, so that people actually can feel a real sense of ownership that actually I can look at this and say that's what my council is doing. And that for those of us who are elected, at the end of our time, we can stand on a record and say, look, 10 years ago we said we'd do this, and look, this is how far we come with it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Councillor Gessner.
thank you.
So,
The themes that have come out in the report, I agree with them, and I'm glad to see. I think it's a good change that we've made, where there are actually less themes and it's a bit more focused, and it will be easy for us to remember and talk about, and that's really good. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how the themes, how they will shape the work that we do, sort of ignoring the fact that we might not exist and so on. So I guess one of the things is the annual delivery. So I guess themes transformed into projects, and those is one way. But are there other, what's the kind of mechanism, what can residents expect to see, how these themes aren't just words and actually mean something?
The easiest way to explain it is to take kind of two cuts at it. One is to say that we've all seen how every report that comes to us hangs off one or more currently corporate plan themes. This will operate in the same sort of way, but in terms of impact on our day-to-day work, it's actually going to be translated down into actions that the officers do through two stages. It starts off with the annual delivery plan, which we've just been talking about, but it then gets transported further down into individual service plans. So it actually says, yeah, you may well be working on revenue and benefits, but this is a key part report, feeding back into council plan aim for sustainable finances and transformation. Things like that, it will all get reported down, and it then gets reported back through that into the new reporting dashboards. I'd rather hope to have some mock-ups of these to show everybody tonight. Unfortunately, with the moving target of LGR, they're not going to be here. They'll come later. I was never going to be able to promise them all to be running from day one of new council plan. We knew we'd have some transition from the existing reporting style of long spreadsheets, which actually give an awful lot of very good, very detailed views of our operations, but I appreciate they're not the most accessible, the most readable. So that's a work in progress still, but again, it's the sort of thing that closes to the loop.
Thank you. Nick, did you want to say anything?
If I may, Chair, I'm so sorry. I don't want to interrupt the flow. While you've got access to the portfolio holder, it's really important you have it. But one of the members said that this was a statutory document. I just want to make sure everyone is quite clear. It isn't of itself a statutory document. It's actually a policy document. What it does is it links the statutory.
And it informs us as to what we're likely to be able to achieve. We are constrained by how financial reporting is done and how the reports that come through to joint audit and governance. It doesn't easily fall to spreading stuff through with different sections of council plan. I'm sure it's always there, but it's not easily highlighted into. I know Simon's got probably more clarification than I'm able to express at this point.
I was just going to say, I mean, historically, we have always, for discretionary growth, in particular, we have always asked for a link to what corporate plan priority the project or the growth bid relates to. I think the challenge, as we've seen already tonight with this year's budget, I mean, the finances are constrained. There is one discretionary growth bid which, looking at the strategic priorities and objectives, I think would quite happily fit under promoting healthy, sustainable and inclusive communities, keeping the community hub going. On the capital growth, again, there's most of that was essential to keep the operation going, but you would have the discretionary item that's funded from section 106. So is it actually discretionary if it's back with 106? But again, as work in a leisure centre, again, you're back to promoting healthy, sustainable and inclusive communities again. So I think the budget, the budget, it's slightly ironic because given we're doing a new corporate plan, this is one of the years where it's less evidentially based, and you can see the link. But historically, we have always had that link, and it's been demonstrable on the discretionary side. Clearly, there are statutory things we have to do that occasionally require growth. That it might be less transparent how it links to a corporate plan priority, but if that's statutory, we have to do them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess those questions might become particularly relevant when you're looking at which capital projects to proceed with or not.
Yeah, so you'd have to apply the same logic to, you know, if you were taking money out of the budget as you would if you're putting money into the budget.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions regarding the council plan?
The area that I represent is on the edge of the Vale, and actually quite a lot of the people who live in my ward use Didcot and travel to Didcot for leisure purposes, for maybe for work and so on and so forth. And I was wondering, I've not had a look myself, to what extent our plan meshes with South's plan. And obviously this is a problem that goes away in a few years, as we all keep saying. But I'm just intrigued as to, obviously we are separate councils that make separate decisions, but can you see alignment?
I can certainly reassure you, Councillor, that I have had quite a lot of discussions with my opposite number, who've actually, the portfolios have changed over the last year. And so, first of all, the council panel now is Councillor Katie Rahai. We've had some joint meetings on council plans. This is different. I would say it's not a direct. We haven't come up with a joint council plan. But we're not contradicting each other. I'd say they probably rhyme more than duplicate each other. We're thinking from the same starting point, same sort of DNA, really. I'd be alarmed if we were doing stuff remarkably differently.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Or we haven't been asked to specifically make a recommendation to Cabinet because the recommendation on our paper is the one that Cabinet is given to approve the council plan and recommend its adoption to full council. But are there any points that we would like to make to Cabinet? Presumably there is not a lot of time to revise this if it's going to full council in 2 weeks' time.
It's going to Cabinet on Friday.
Yes.
So
but I think this is one occasion where we have had a chance to look at this a long time ago and in plenty of time for it to be revised. And I think we can all see that our comments have been incorporated. So that's good. But does anybody have any comments, or are we happy to note and thank all involved?
Yes.
I propose that. Seconder. Councillor Gascoigne, thank you very much. All right. I think, thank you, Councillor Fulsham, for bringing that back
thank
to
you
us.
for making it a better plan with your input earlier in the year. Well, earlier last year up to now. But...
Yeah.
Not so many people so nice about scrutiny, actually, Andy. So thank you very much for that.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. Right, I shall close that item then, and we shall move on to when I can get back to my agenda. Final item of this evening, which is item 11, which is scrutiny review actions. This is a bit niche and internal, but essentially we have a report from our head of legal and democratic services, Nick Bennett, in which is a response to a review we received from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny last year. And so I'm going to ask Nick, would you like to introduce your report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, of course. Thank you. I should get it done within 3 hours, I'd have thought. There are so look, it's a fairly straightforward report which members will have read, and as you've already touched on, the 2024 report from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny was a 17-page report, and it covered a raft of thoughts, suggestions and directions for councillors to consider. Having done that, it's now for you councillors and those of your colleagues at South and at the joint scrutiny committees to carry out that exercise and to go in some depth into the work that's been put forwards and make some recommendations and that's really been thoroughly debated and considered from all angles. And as such, the joint scrutiny committee has instigated a task and finish group, and you have been asked to nominate through your chair 2 persons to sit on that chair. It's really important that that task and finish group has the widest member expertise and experience so that it can put forwards a useful and meaningful document that can give a direction of travel for scrutiny to improve scrutiny, you know, which is ultimately the foundation stone of why scrutiny is there in the first place. Now, that will be done just in outline. There'll be a facilitated workshop with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny just to tease out from them exactly what it is that they were saying. Although it's a 17-page report, there's a lot more detail that those members will want to go into. There'll then be at least 2 full workshops in person and then online to discuss those issues and carry them through, to look at whether the recommendations, if you like, are supported, whether they're accepted, and how they suggest that the councils approach those recommendations with actions to lead to genuine improvement for the people of the area. Also, probably to touch on some prioritisation within that, particularly in light of local government reorganisation. That's going to be possibly a more important part of the job than it might have been a year ago. If that then results in, after that, I should say the scrutiny officer, Adriana Partridge, and I will be facilitating those discussions, and she and I will carry forwards our statutory roles for that. After that task and finish group has finished, it will then report back to each of the committees, including, importantly, obviously this one, with their recommendations, for you to then debate further, and then to either carry out actions within your own gift or to make onward reports. For example, most likely, if your terms of reference needed to change, that would go to VOWH full council for those changes to be adopted. I've tried to kind of rattle through it because you know it's 8:20, but that's broadly what the report is to make sure you're aware of, and for you as chair to then nominate formally the 2 persons who will be on that committee, task and finish group, to carry out that work so that you can then finish it off and finalise the way forwards for this committee for the next several years. That's it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nick. So I think, as everybody should have received, I sent you all an email last week suggesting that I represent this committee and that Councillor Debbie Hallett joins me. She has a lot of experience on scrutiny, as well as in cabinet, and I know she's been very keen to join that task and finish group. So I would hope that you would agree to that, or if you hadn't, that you would let me know. So I assume everybody is happy with that. Great. I would also say that we've asked for Ron Batstone to be our 2nd member for the joint scrutiny committee as well. So we will have good representation, and again, Ron is extremely experienced. Just as in South, you've got Councillor Lee Rawlins, I believe, being nominated, who again sits on both committees. So there's a huge amount of experience, I think, coming into that group, assuming all the nominations are accepted. Yeah, and I think we look forward to working with you. And I should say, Nick, you only joined us in October, and part of the reason why we didn't act on this report sooner was because we were waiting for a permanent head of legal and democratic to join us. So thank you ever so much for picking this up and for working with us on it, and Adriana as well. And I think we're all really looking forward getting going. I've had lots of discussions with Councillor Gabrishak and Councillor Arlett in South as well, and so I think this report is kind of a formality in a sense of just agreeing how that goes forward. But if anybody has any questions now for Nick, please ask them while he's here, or indeed as well.
Do we have an approximate timeline as to when that report back to us might be?
Chair, Candida actually next to you, who I very rudely didn't mention, has been doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. She's managing that calendar extremely tightly. At the moment, there's a little bit of flex in it, but I think we're looking at coming back, if I remember correctly, in April, isn't it?
I think so. I think, yeah, something of, sorry, not in front of me right now, but I think we were hoping to make significant movement towards July. So
yeah,
it will be coming back before July, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. So Chair, the thing that we'll have to build in, obviously, is that those meetings take place all day, face to face, facilitated, as I say, by the officers I've mentioned, and it may well have to come back to full council. So it's unfortunately it's not a quick process, but it is an important one that as you say, that you've got the most in-depth experience and breadth of experience from the whole of your committee, as well as from the task and finish group. So I won't apologise for it. I think it's a really important thing that we do it in a properly considered way.
And I would say that at all points, anybody's input is welcome and invited, and that we will be letting you know in the interim what our thoughts are and where we're going with it as well before any formal reports come back. But yeah, any other comments or questions on that?
Chair, you should have a date as well soon for the meeting with CFGS as well. So I'm going to probably sort that out within the next few days.
I believe we're looking at late February for that meeting with Ian Parry. That'd be great. Thank you ever so much. Yes, thank you, Candida, for your work on getting this together. So if I could formally, if I could propose then that I and Councillor Hallett form our members for that working group, that would be great. And as I said, do get in touch with either of us at any point, particularly if you have prioritisation thoughts from the recommendations from that report, which we all have. All right, thank you ever so much. And with that, I shall close that item and close the meeting. I believe we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've come to the end of our meeting. All right, thank you ever so much. If we can stop the live stream, please. And thank you ever so much, everybody, for your input.